Hello everyone, my name is John Sierra and I am a Tolkien scholar, which means I am always learning about the Tolkien legendarium and about Tolkien in general. And because of that, people come to me with questions a lot, and so I made this channel where I can answer your questions. I made my Quora where I answer a whole lot more questions, and if you have a question for me, you can certainly ask in the comments. I'd be happy to answer you there, but if you want to be featured in a video, you can definitely go on over to Quora. The link is in the description to my Quora. Make an account there. It's very easy. You probably already have one because you can sign in with Facebook, you can sign in with Google, ask a question, and tag me in it. Even if you didn't go through the link, if you ask a Tolkien-related question, it'll give you a list of people to tag. My name is going to be on that list because I am very active in the Tolkien space on Quora. Anyway, we're going to start with a reading for you guys, and I actually wondered whether or not the readings were a good thing or not, whether I should continue doing them, because I was like, do people really like this? But I got a very nice comment from someone who says they love the readings, so I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to read you a bit from the Silmarillion, and it's going to be from the Akalabeth section, which means Second Age stuff. And in this case, it's going to be about Numenor sort of like looking for immortality and looking to dwell in the Undying Lands and the answer that they get. And I feel it's one of the most misunderstood passages for a lot of reasons, but let me just go ahead and do that. Thus it was that because of the ban of the Valar, the voyages of the Dunedain in those days went ever eastward and not westward, from the darkness of the north to the heats of the south, and beyond the south to the nether darkness. And they came even into the inner seas, and sailed about Middle-earth, and glimpsed from their high prows the gates of morning in the east. And the Dunedain came at times to the shores of the great lands, and they took pity on the forsaken world of Middle-earth. And the lords of Numenor set foot again under the western shores in the dark years of men. And none yet dared to withstand them, for most of the men of that age sat under the shadow, were now grown weak and fearful. And coming among them, the Numenorians taught them many things. Corn and wine they brought, and they instructed men in the sowing of seed and the grinding of grain, in the hewing of wood and the shaping of stone, and in the ordering of their life such as it might be in the lands of swift death and little bliss. Then the men of Middle-earth were comforted, and here and there upon the western shores the houseless woods drew back, and men shook off the yoke of the offspring of Morgoth, and unlearned their terror of the dark, and they revered the memory of the tall sea kings. And when they had departed they called them gods, hoping for their return. For at that time the Numenorians dwelt never long in Middle-earth, nor made there as yet any habitation of their own. Eastward they must sail, but never west their hearts returned. Now this yearning grew ever greater with the years, and the Numenorians began to hunger for the undying city that they saw from afar, and the desire of everlasting life, to escape from death, and the ending of delight grew strong upon them. And ever as their power and glory grew greater, their unquiet increased. For though the Valar had rewarded the Dunedain with long life, they could not take from them the weariness of the world that comes at last, and they died. Even their kings of the seed of the Arundel, and the span of their life was brief in the eyes of the Eldar. Thus it was that a shadow fell upon them, in which maybe the will of Morgoth was at work, that still moved in the world. And the Numenorians began to murmur, at first in their hearts, and then in open words, against the doom of man, and most of all against the ban which forbade them to sail into the west. And they said among themselves, why do the lords of the west sit there in peace unending, while we must die, and go we not know whither, leaving our home and all that we have made, and the Eldar die not, even those that rebelled against the lords? And since we have mastered all seas, and no water is so wild or so wide that our ships cannot overcome it, why should we not go to Avalone, and greet there our friends? And some there were who said, why should we not go even to Aemon, and taste there, were it for a day, the bliss of the powers? Have we not become mighty among the people of Arda? The Eldar reported these words to the Valar, and Manwë was grieved, seeing a cloud gather on the noontide of Numenor. And he sent messengers to the Dunedain, who spoke earnestly to the king, and to all who would listen, concerning the fate and fashion of the world. The doom of the world, they said, one alone can change who made it. And were you so to voyage, that escaping all deceits and snares, you came indeed to Aemon, the blessed realm, little would it profit you, for it is not the land of Manwë that makes its people deathless, but the deathless that dwell therein have hallowed the land, and there you would wither and grow weary the sooner, as moths in a light too strong and steadfast. But the king said, And does not Earendil my forefather live? Or is he not in the land of Aemon? To which they answered, You know that he has a fate apart, and was a judge to the firstborn who die not. Yet this also is his doom, that he can never return again to mortal lands. Whereas you and your people are not of the firstborn, but are mortal men, as Ilúvatar made you. Yet it seems that you desire now to have the good of both kindreds, to sail to Valinor when you will, and to return when you please to your homes. This cannot be. Nor can the Valar take away the gifts of Ilúvatar. The Eldar, you say, are unpunished, and even those who rebel do not die. Yet that is to them neither reward nor punishment, but the fulfillment of their being. They cannot escape, and are bound to this world, never to leave it so long as it lasts, for its life is theirs, and you are punished for the rebellion of men, you say, in which you had a small part. And so it is that you die, but that was not at first appointed for a punishment. Thus you escape and leave the world, and are not bound to it in hope or in weariness. Which of us therefore should envy the others? And the Númenóreans answered, Why should we not envy the Valar, or even the least of the deathless? For of us it is required a blind trust and a hope without assurance, knowing not what lies before in little while. And yet we also love the earth, and would not lose it. Then the messengers said, Indeed, the mind of Ilúvatar concerning you is not known to the Valar, and he has not revealed all things that are to come. But this we hold to be true, that your home is not here, neither in the land of Aemon, nor anywhere within the circles of the world, and the doom of men, that they should depart, was at first a gift of Ilúvatar. It became a grief to them only, because coming under the shadow of Morgoth it seemed to them that they were surrounded by a great darkness, of which they were afraid, and some grew wilful and proud, and would not yield until life was reft from them. We do not bear the ever-mounting burden of the years. Let me start that part again. We who bear the ever-mounting burden of the years do not clearly understand this. Be if that grief has returned to trouble you, as you say, then we fear that the shadow arises once more and grows again in your hearts. Therefore, though you be the Dunedain, fairest of men, who escaped from the shadow of old and fought valiantly against it, we say to you, beware. The will of Eru may not be gainsaid, and the Valar bid you earnestly not to withhold the trust to which you are called, lest soon it become a bond by which you are constrained. Hope rather that in the end even the least of your desires shall have fruit. The love of Arda was set in your hearts by Ilúvatar, and he does not plant to no purpose. Nonetheless, many ages of men unborn may pass ere that purpose is made known, and to you it will be revealed, and not to the Valar. Wonderful, wonderful part. The reason that I say that section is so misunderstood is a lot of people get it in their heads that the likes of Frodo and Bilbo and Sam and Gimli would have sailed west, and they dwelt in Tol Eressëa. And that's possible that they may have, but there are people who say it with such confidence that they definitely dwelt in Tol Eressëa, that they did not go to Valinor or to Eldamar, because it's dangerous, because they'll die sooner. And really, it comes from the part about the moth to the flame. But what's important to note here is... Let's see. Where is it? There's one part that's extremely important to understand. The first is that this is not the Valar, because a lot of people say, well, the Valar said that. No, the elves said that. The elves said that that would happen, that death would come to them sooner if they dwelled in Aemon. And their lives wouldn't be longer, they would be shorter, but that does not mean that there are holy death rays coming from Manwë. It's just that it's not made for mortals. It's unchanging. A season to those in the West, to the elves or to the Ainur, is like a lifetime for a man. And it would seem that they would be there and then they would be not. in a very short amount of time. They're speaking from the elvish perspective, and that's important to note. Whereas the men are saying that they want to dwell there, if only to behold it, but what they're really looking for is more life because they fear death, and they're being told that you're not meant to fear death. And it is said that, the elves will be the ones who are jealous of the men in time, and even the Valar would become jealous of the men in time. And really, what it was that the men of Númenor were given free reign for almost the entirety of the world, and they even came to the Gates of Morning, which is where the world ends in the east. And they're told, just don't go to this one place, and of course that's where they want to go. And it just really shows the nature of man. Tolkien was, of course, telling a very biblical story in a way, and it's sort of like being said, you could eat from any tree but that one, and of course what happens? They eat from that tree, and then the story goes south from there. Or gets better from there, depending on your perspective, I should say. But let's get to your questions. I have 16 questions to get through today, at least if I counted correctly. And we're going to start with this one, which asks, what are the reasons for the lack of support for Gondor in their fight against Mordor? It's an interesting query. They had a little bit more support, or perhaps a great bit more support than you may think. Sauron just had more. Sauron's armies were bigger. There was a lot of support going to Gondor, but it almost wasn't enough. Gondor needed aid because their population was at a low point. They had been fighting this war for a very long time, for nearly the lifetime of a man, and before that there were issues with plague, there were issues with other wars in the north. Rohan was locked into an eternal alliance with Gondor by a sacred oath, and because of that, of course, they came. They were a bit late because they got attacked first, but they still came. Then there were the beacons, which called, of course, aid from all over other parts of Gondor. Anyone that could be spared to defend Minas Tirith. And of course, they were like, this isn't enough, because there weren't enough people, but they did have aid. Rohan also brought Druadan with us, the Druidine, the wild men with them, which was a historic new alliance. They had never aligned themselves with Rohan or any of the civilized men at that time. The Ents were helping out in their own way. They may have come to Minas Tirith, but they were busy. They were setting Isengard to rights, and Isengard is a part of Gondor. It's not part of Rohan, it borders Rohan, so it concerns them greatly. It's pretty far away from Minas Tirith, and it's closer to Rohan, but it's still part of Gondor. They had the Rangers from the north, Halbarad and the Grey Company, and Rivendell pitched in because Elladan and Elrohir, the sons of Elrond, were there. Arwen made the standard, the black banner that Aragorn was using, that struck fear into the hearts of Sauron's minions. And he also brought with him freed slaves that he had rescued from the Corsairs of Umbar. But what of the other nations? They were fighting too. The war wasn't only happening in Gondor. Sauron didn't put all of his eggs into one basket. He was very concerned with Gondor and Minas Tirith because he thought that's where the One Ring was, but he was also concerned with taking over Middle-earth. In the north, his forces, the Easterlings, were marching west across Rovanion, and they were held back only by the united armies of the dwarves, of Erebor and the men of Dale. The elves of Thranduil were there as well. And then, of course, there's Gandalf himself. Gandalf is a representative of the Undying Lands, and he was fighting for Gondor. There were representatives from the Shire there. Pippin was a knight of Gondor. Merry was a knight of Rohan. So they did have a lot of help, more than you may think. It's just that Sauron's army was bigger. Okay, next question. This one came in from Carol Cross. I hope I'm saying this right. Krozik. In the Hobbit movie trilogy, when specifically did Bilbo tell the dwarves about the One Ring, or when did they find out about the One Ring? Well, Bilbo couldn't have told anybody that he found the One Ring, because he had no idea that's what he had. At no point in the movie trilogy does anyone know that ring is the One Ring, other than the audience, because they had seen The Lord of the Rings. This is somewhat true to the book, which was written before The Lord of the Rings, so the concept of the Rings of Power and the One Ring to rule them all was not yet created. Though Tolkien knew in the early stages who the ring belonged to. Sauron, who was at this point in the writing called Thu, the necromancer, in that he would be the titular Lord of the Rings that would be in the sequel that he was planning to do. The ideas for the sequel at this point were on a much smaller scale. There was no Aragorn, they didn't travel to the south, there was no Mordor. But Bilbo does keep the ring a secret until he's basically forced to use it in front of the dwarves, which happened in Mirkwood, stating that he will vanish and to not be alarmed. While holding secret meetings in Thranduil's dungeons, he told them a story about how he got the ring. He changed some details. It was a story. It wasn't really the truth. The ring is not revealed to be the One Ring until the Fellowship of the Ring, which was 78 years after The Hobbit. So, I mean, it starts 61 years later, but then there's a gap before we find out what Bilbo's ring is, that it is the One Ring. Okay, next question. This one came in from Zero, who asks, the Avari elves only declined the summons of Aroma in the First Age due to uncertainty and the lies of Melkor, so why didn't they change their mind once they had more information? They might have. Some of them probably did. And as such, they would no longer be considered Avari elves. Avari means unwilling, refusing the call of Arome to travel to the sea, where they would receive the call of Ulmo. The question is correct in one way, that the reason was distrust, but not so much due to the lies of Melkor, but that they thought Orome was Melkor. Seeing Orome, he was presented as this great hunter on a horse, and some elves approached him in wonder, but others fled because they believed that he was the same hunter that they had been whispering about, that had stolen their people away, never to return. We can attribute that to Melkor, and any elf that had seen Melkor didn't exactly return. So who is to say that Orome wasn't the same guy that had been snatching their people away? Now, it is entirely possible that later on, when they had better information, that some of these elves changed their mind, at which point they wouldn't really be Avari anymore, which isn't really a race of elves or type of elf, but it's a descriptor based on a cultural decision to not leave. However, it should be mentioned that according to Tolkien, the elves were never really meant to leave Middle-earth. The Valar were doing the best that they could with a bad decision, but the elves were meant to dwell in Middle-earth, and the Avari actually wound up, because they stayed, they fulfilled a very important role that the elves were always supposed to fulfill, to assist the second-born children of Iluvatar, the mortal men, in their emergence, and to teach them culture and language and everything. Okay. Next question. This is another movie question. Let's see. Wait, does it say who this one is? No, this is anonymous. After Frodo looked into the mirror, Galadriel told him he will try to take the ring. You know of whom I speak. Who exactly was Galadriel referring to? Is it Sauron, Boromir, or somebody else? She was being vague there, but it was definitely Boromir. The movies are, of course, different from the books, so I'm going to keep this as movie-centric as I can. While there were a great many people in the audience who read the books and they knew that Boromir was going to snap and try to take the ring, there were also a great many people in the audience, perhaps more so, that did not know this, that did not read the books. In the book, the foreshadowing of Boromir trying to take the ring happened after Lothlorien, but it was told through character observations that were not dialogue. It was mentioned that Frodo noticed that Boromir was acting kind of funny, and had been since they left Lothlorien. This sort of thing, it's easy to portray on paper, but it's hard to portray in a film without having the characters involved have a conversation. Like Sam goes to Frodo and said, that Boromir fellow's acting strange, That sort of exposition could come off as clunky in a movie, so Jackson chose other methods. First, Frodo slips and falls at Carathris, and the ring goes flying. Boromir picks it up, and he gazes at it with wonder for a time, and we already know that he doesn't agree with destroying it. Aragorn has to sternly tell Boromir to return the ring to Frodo. Then, of course, Galadriel lays this cryptic line on Frodo via telepathy. She says that Frodo knows, but does the audience know? Perhaps they picked up on the clues. Or perhaps it was still a mystery, and a surprise. And then on second viewing, you can now see that it was all set up, that it's not how it happened in the books, but it's a good change. It's good cinema. Someone recently wrote a question that got me thinking a bit. In the book, before leaving Lothlorien, Boromir was under the influence of two of the rings of power. Even three, when you think about it. Gandalf had his ring Narya, known to give aid and comfort to Gandalf in helping bring peace, wisdom, and courage to others. Gandalf's influence was gone, and they quickly fell under the umbrella of Galadriel. And before Boromir even met Gandalf, he was around Elrond, who had the third ring. And I found this idea fascinating. It doesn't really apply to the films, but it suggests that Boromir was always sort of vulnerable to the influence of the One Ring, but had previously been afforded a shield against it, and with that shield gone, he was overcome. Okay. All right, next question. What was the reason for the elves of Rivendell to follow Elrond instead of staying with Gil-galad? Well, Gil-galad died, so there's that. Gil-galad died when he fought Sauron in a rather horrific way because he had been badly burned by the Dark Lord's touch. Elrond and Círdan were with him when he died. Gil-galad's realm was no more. There were too few Noldor to need a high king. Celebrimbor was gone. Hallan, or Eregion, was sacked. Lindon was diminished. So the two elf lords split up. So to speak, Círdan, as being the Lord of Lindon, and Elrond made a small place for himself called Imladris, or Rivendell. Previous to this, Elrond lived in Lindon with Gil-galad, but they may have considered it wise to not have more than one of the three rings in one place. Gil-galad had passed his ring to Elrond before they even went to Mordor, so he sought a new realm rather than staying with Círdan while Galadriel kept the third. And, of course, Gil-galad, he died, but he's not really dead. He's still alive. It's just that because he was slain, he winds up in Mandos in the Undying Lands, and he's not going to come back. He's not going to come back to Middle-earth. Only one elf has ever returned to Middle-earth, and that was Celebrimbor. That was Glorfindel, and that's because he was on a mission from Manwë. Okay, next question. How are the elves in The Lord of the Rings still alive after all the battles they've fought? I get why humans are still alive, as we're short-lived and breed like rabbits, but don't the elves breed less and mature slower? How are they still around? Well, I just sort of touched on this a little bit. It's because they don't die. They don't really die. Now, I know what you might say. I saw the movie. I saw Haldir got stabbed and he died. Of course, elves can die, except they really don't. Bodily death is an inconvenience for them. It's a messy one, it's a painful one, but it doesn't keep them down long. The spirits of slain elves do not depart from the world like the spirits of mortals do, but instead are drawn to Mandos, which is a real physical place, not an afterlife. There, they can usually get new bodies, which are identical to their old ones, and they can come out of Mandos and be with their family in Aman, the Undying Lands. One, Glorfindel, even came back to Middle-earth after being killed by a Balrog. So the question should never be how come the elves haven't died out, but why haven't they completely outpopulated all the other races? And the reason is in the question itself, because they mature slowly and breed less. Okay, next question. Oh, okay, this is the one from the thumbnail. This is a fun one. What is the most pernicious and persistent myth about The Lord of the Rings that is believed by people who have seen Peter Jackson's movies but haven't read the books? So for me, the biggest one is that Sauron lacked a physical form, and he was just an eyeball. The films themselves are not even consistent with this. Saruman himself says that Sauron lacks a physical form. Gandalf seems to suggest that he can regain it with the One Ring if he recovers it. So here's the line from the movie that Saruman said. Sauron has regained much of his former strength. He cannot yet take physical form, but his spirit has lost none of its potency. Concealed within his fortress, the Lord of Mordor sees all. His gaze pierces cloud, shadow, earth, and flesh. You know of what I speak, Gandalf. A great eye, lidless, wreathed in flame. However, Sauron absolutely had a physical form, even in the movie, which Aragorn saw in the Palantir. They even filmed a scene. They didn't use it, not even in the extended version, but they filmed a scene where Sauron would appear not only in a physical form at Morannon, but in a fair form, which you can see for about a second before the armor materializes around him, and you could look that up on YouTube. This Anatar scene, just that's what you would look up, Anatar scene, was not used, but it was repurposed a bit. With the CGI, Sauron was covered up with a CGI troll. The scenes at Morannon in the movie where Aragorn is fighting a troll and he was losing, he was being pinned down, that was supposed to be Sauron, and that was all intercut originally with the ring being destroyed. In the Hobbit films, we see Sauron in a physical form as well, and that's even earlier. He was the necromancer. So we could chalk up what Saruman said as being, well, Saruman is just wrong, right? The character can be wrong. But it didn't help the audience's perception. The films led a lot of people to believe that Sauron has no physical form and he's just an eyeball. This is not helped by the fact that Sauron, despite being the titular Lord of the Rings, does not have any sort of scenes or dialogue in the book. Sauron, of course, did have a physical form, and he had one for quite a long time. He was the necromancer in Mirkwood. He personally tortured Gollum, who described him as being blackened and having a missing finger. There really is an eye on the tower, at least some of the time. This is how he looks out. But he has a physical body in the tower. Tolkien even put it into the Ring verse. One for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. He's not an eye. He's sitting on a throne. Sauron does, in the end, abandon his physical body and attacks in a spirit form, a great storm cloud figure crowned with lightning. But the one had perished, and he was blown away by the winds just as his hand was about to reach Aragorn and Gandalf. That idea that Sauron is just an eyeball, it still persists. People ask, how can an eye wear a ring? How can Sauron do anything when he's just an eyeball, etc., etc., etc.? The Lord of the Rings isn't even the only movie to contribute to this. If you ever saw the Lego Batman movie, there's this scene where the Joker calls all these villains forth, and there's like the big triumvirate of three of them: King Kong, Sauron, and Godzilla. And Sauron is depicted as the Eye of Sauron, and it suggests that he's not just the eye, he's the tower as well. I have no issue with the Lego Batman movie. It's a children's movie, and it's a very good children's movie, but it shows that there are many people that still perceive Sauron as being an eyeball on a tower in great need of Visine. Okay. Next question. This is a quick one. Did Sam and Frodo successfully reach the Undying Lands in the Lord of the Rings series? They left for them. Did they get there? Tolkien doesn't say, though the answer for Frodo is definitely yes. Considering that Frodo was traveling with Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond, Gildor, and Bilbo on a ship made by Círdan, I think it's safe to say that he arrived in the Undying Lands just fine. Sam, the last we hear from him, he's at a very old age, and he leaves the Shire to seek the Havens. Did he arrive at the Grey Havens? We don't know, but I'd like to think that he did. And if he arrived there, I'm sure Círdan would have made absolutely sure that he got to the Undying Lands safely. Okay, next question. What is your most controversial opinion about the Lord of the Rings movies? Okay. Alright, I have one that might raise an eyebrow. My hot take on the films is that the elves were generally mismanaged and almost consistently poorly cast. Right from the get-go, we gloss over the elves. We get the very briefest glimpse of Gil-galad and Círdan. There's no explanation as to who they are. Elrond is played by an actor that I think is very good, Hugo Weaving. But in a better version of the movie, he would have played Denethor, not Elrond. Elrond is very stern, and he seems angry a lot of the time. Arwen is mostly there to look good. Yes, she has more scenes than she did in the book, but she still doesn't come across as much more than eye candy in the movie. And that's a shame, because Liv Tyler is a fantastic person. And it's not just those guys. It's a lot of them. We never get the feeling that the elves are the fair people. Legolas, he's like a superhero. He's like Spider-Man. And he doesn't have that impish good humor that he had in the book. Probably the closest they got to it when Gimli was trying to see over the wall at Helm's Deep, and he says something like, "Shall I describe it for you, or shall I get a box?" That to me sounded like Legolas. The exception to this would be Galadriel. She was really well cast and very well portrayed. The mirror scene, it was better handled by the animated film, by the Ralph Bakshi film. But still, overall, Galadriel was the best elf in the movies. Círdan, his one line was not even cut. He was cut out. He didn't get to say anything at the end. And he's so in the background, you can't even really see him in good focus. Gildor and Glorfindel are completely missing. Haldir is practically a different character, and he dies, even though he doesn't die in the book. He dies in the movie, and he dies in what I consider to be a very extraneous way. Most of it, though, I focus again and again on Elrond. That's the one that I keep coming back to. He's never been portrayed correctly in a film. All right, next question. What were Saruman's plans for conquering Arda if he had won and taken over Middle-earth in The Lord of the Rings? Saruman actually told you his plans quite explicitly. Saruman told Gandalf exactly what he planned to do, and hoping that Gandalf would join him. Saruman was quite upset that Gandalf didn't go along with his plans, and he kept him a prisoner, so Gandalf could not spread the word, but of course we know that Gandalf escaped. Gandalf recounted Saruman's words during the Council of Elrond. I'm going to read you that part. "And then, Gandalf, my old friend and helper," he said, coming near and speaking now in a softer voice. "I said we. For we it may be, if you will join with me. A new power is rising. Against it the old allies and policies will not avail us all. There is no hope left in elves or dying Númenor. This, then, is one choice before you, before us. We may join with that power. It would be wise, Gandalf. There is hope that way. His victory is at hand, and there will be rich reward for those that aided it. As the power grows, its proved friends will also grow, and the wise, such as you and I, may, with patience, come at last to direct its courses, to control it. We can bide our time. We can keep our thoughts in our hearts, deploring, maybe, evils done by the way, but approving the high and ultimate purpose, knowledge, rule, order, all the things we have so far striven in vain to accomplish, hindered rather than helped by our weak or idle friends. There need not be, there would not be, any real change in our designs, only in our means." So in wishing to use Sauron's power to take over Middle-earth, Saruman is claiming he can do good, somehow still stay on mission. Gandalf knows that it's a lie. Not that Saruman is lying to Gandalf, but he's lying to himself, really. He should know better. One cannot use evil methods to achieve good ends. Joining with Sauron to attempt to guide him to good or to usurp him and use his power for good. It's a foolish thought, but this was his plan. Okay, next question. Where did the wizards originate from, and why did they enter Middle-earth? The wizards have a complicated history, but they originally came from a place called the Timeless Void. The Istari, which is the wizards, they are Maiar spirits. Essentially, they are angels. They were created by Iluvatar. The Iluvatar is God. And along with all of the Ainur are the angels. The Maiar are the lower order, and the Valar are the higher order of angels. They sang the song that created the universe. Iluvatar gave form to the music, and many of the Ainur, not all of them, but many of them wished to dwell in the world that was created, and they settled in the central continent, which is called Middle-earth. This would have left They would leave Middle-earth later on, after the First War, and they went to the Undying Lands to the west. But the Istari had an important role before that. They guarded the elves from the ravages of the First War. There were 5 of them. They were called Guardians at the time, and the names they used were Tarandor, Oloran, Hravendil, Palasendo, and Hymenar. They were led by a 6th, Melian. They all left, and they went to dwell in the Undying Lands with the rest of the Ainur and whatever elves were willing to come with them. And many of them took other names. Taurendor became Curumo. Hravendil became Iwendil. Palasendo became Palando. And Hymenar became LotR. Olorin kept his name. They came back to Middle-earth later as wizards to assist the Free Peoples against Sauron. LotR and Palando came in the Second Age, along with the elf Glorfindel. They were called Marenitar the Blue and Ramastano the Blue. In the Third Age, the rest of them arrived. Curumo became Saruman the White. Iwendil became Radagast the Brown, and Olorin took many names, but of course the one we know him by the best was Gandalf the Grey. They came over ships, that's how they got here, as any other travelers from the Undying Lands came. Okay, next question. This one came in from Martin de Kroon, who asks, in The Steward and the King, that's a chapter in The Lord of the Rings, Gandalf speaks of Telperion, eldest of trees. Do we know if Treebeard knew of Telperion? Probably not. And Gandalf's claim that Telperion is the eldest of all trees strikes me as slightly dubious. Treebeard never had been to the Undying Lands. He never saw the two trees of Valinor, of which Telperion was the elder. It is possible that he may have heard of them from the elves, but there are a great many things that Treebeard does not know about. He's old, and he's wise, but that doesn't mean he knows everything. What I find interesting is the thought of Telperion being the eldest tree. Gandalf's wording is interesting. Eldest usually refers to the eldest that survives, but Telperion is gone. He may be saying that Telperion was the first tree ever, but this also doesn't really ring true to me. The two trees were created by Yavanna as the light source for all of the Undying Lands, but before that, they were created. They were the lamps in the Spring of Arda. Do we believe that during the Spring of Arda there were no trees? Or in the darkness between the destruction of the lamp and the trees being created that there were no trees? Perhaps there were no trees in Aman and Telperion was the first, but there were also no trees in Middle-earth? The best explanation is that Gandalf simply is being theatrical and dramatic. All the while, these white trees, the special ones that he was referring to in The Steward and the King, they date back to a gift from Erisea to Numenor, and further back they originated from Telperion, or at least a tree that was a copy of Telperion. Gandalf may have simply meant that it was the eldest of the trees of that line, or, that led to the white trees of Gondor. Now, I wanted to point out that there was somebody in the comments here who came up with an alternate idea here. Patrick here said, perhaps the meaning is that it lived the longest of any tree in Arda. All other trees, whether they sprouted before or after, had shorter lifespans. It's sort of like saying Methuselah is the eldest person in the Bible. The time of the two trees lasted just under 1,500 years. Interestingly, this would mean that many trees in the real world are known to live several times as long. Okay, so not only do I think you may be onto something, Patrick, but I feel like you're more right than you think you are, because each year of the tree was 9.5 solar years. So it's not that unrealistic. Well, it is unrealistic, as that's the point. It's more fantastical than you think. You think, well, wow, we have trees in the real world that are older than 1,500 years, but not 1,500 years of the trees, because those are very long years. Okay, next question. Why would it be the end of elves and men in Middle-earth if Sauron got his ring back? Elves and men defeated him before when he had the ring. What's to say they cannot do that again? Well, what it comes down to is they really don't make them like they used to. Elendil and Gil-galad's united armies defeated Sauron's armies. They had heavy losses. The Mirkwood elves suffered really, really heavy losses. Anarion died during the siege, and neither Gil-galad nor Elendil survived the battle. Sauron would return again, and now these great heroes are gone. And men were weaker and elves were weaker, and that would continue to happen. Even without the ring, he was too much. There were no more High Kings of the Noldor, no vast alliance that could invade Mordor, and for the very longest time, no heir of Elendil. And even if there was a path to victory, even if they could defeat him again, so what? Sauron will just return again at a later date, with or without the ring. Sauron doesn't need the ring to win. It's not the key to his victory. It's the key to his defeat. if they can destroy it. Him not having it means that it can be destroyed. Possibly. Whereas if he regains it, he would be sure to keep it safe and it would never be destroyed. It prevented his return by destroying it, so he can't just come back at a later date. If the elves and the men all managed to muster a great enough force to do the same thing that happened in the Second Age, then they would be doing the same thing that happened in the Second Age, and then he would just come back in the next age. So really, that's why. Okay, next question. Were there dangerous places in Aemon? Since Ungoliant was there, can elves wander into trouble? I happen to think this is a really good question. Aemon is seen as this haven. It's the Undying Lands. The reason that the Valar took as many elves that would come with them to this land is because it was supposedly so much safer. It was free of the taint of Melkor. It was away from the orcs. However, Ungoliant was there, and she might have been there before them. Ungoliant was described as a spirit who had at one point been in league with Melkor, but then she left his service to become the mistress of her own lust. She hid away until later she was discovered by Melkor, who convinced her to help him destroy the two trees. Due to the fact that Manwë could not see through the unlight that Ungoliant could weave, it's safe to assume that the Valar didn't know she was hanging out there. So what else was out there? Aemon was not free from danger, which is why a lot of it seemed to be empty, I think. The elves clustered. They stayed in Valinor, they stayed in Eldamar, they stayed close by. Could they wander into trouble? Yes. Okay, next question. Are there any female dwarves in J.R.R. Tolkien's works? Does he address the absence of female dwarves in his writing? There are, of course, female dwarves. Dwarves do not just spring out of holes in the ground, as Gimli said in the film. Dwarf women are somewhat rare, accounting for only a third of the dwarven population. They don't normally travel, and they never go to war. They are a minority, and they are considered a protected class. When they do travel, they dress as men, and they are said to look so much like the dwarven men that you really can't tell the difference between them. And this, leads to the fact that some dwarven women probably had beards. According to the book The War of the Jewels, Tolkien initially thought of all dwarves as having beards, though his later writings, which came out in The Nature of Middle-earth, he amended it and said that all dwarven men had beards. But it seems that at least some of the dwarven women had beards. Either way, there are dwarf women. And only one has ever been a named character. It would be Dis, which was Thorin's sister. So you really don't see them because they're hiding, basically. Okay, last question. I feel like we got through this in record time. When Gandalf said, "Fly, you fools," was he telling them to take the eagles and fly to Mordor? No, he was not. First, I should mention that Gandalf was using the term fly as in flee, to get away with great haste, and it was not the first time he had been using this term. He had been yelling at them all to fly before he even fell. I'm going to read you a very brief very brief bit here. "Over the bridge," cried Gandalf, recalling his strength. "Fly! This is a foe beyond any of you. I must hold the narrow way. Fly!" Aragorn and Boromir did not heed his command, but still held their ground side by side behind Gandalf at the far edge of the bridge. The others halted just within the doorway on the half-send, and turned, unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone. So as you can see, they weren't listening to him, and he wanted them to fly, to flee with great haste, and to leave him behind. None of the Fellowship were really too keen on this, particularly Aragorn and Boromir. They wanted to stand and fight alongside him. He got off one last "Fly, you fools," as he fell into the chasm. That's the first thing to mention. The second thing to mention is that Gandalf had no designs of taking the eagles. Tolkien said it best. The eagles are not a taxi service. There are a lot, and I do mean a great many reasons why it would be a bad idea to try that. The biggest, though, is that if Gandalf had meant to fly on eagles, they never would have had to go through Moria in the first place. They would have had no reason to go through Moria. When Gandalf returned and managed to get to Lothlorien, and later still, when he reunited with Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas in Fangorn Forest, he never once expressed that he had any desire for anyone to fly on eagles to Mordor, least of all Frodo. Anyway, guys, if you have gotten this far in the video, I must say, it's been 44 minutes and 39 seconds. You must have enjoyed the video if you watched this much of it, so please leave me a like, share the video with anyone you think might like it, leave me a comment, leave me some questions on Korra, and I'll see you guys next time.